The neon rain fell in sheets of electric violet and silver, painting the industrial port city of Pterodex in shades of bioluminescent chaos. Nyx pulled the worn collar of her jacket higher, watching droplets of luminescent water cascade off the metal overhangs above her head. She was lost, utterly, completely lost. And the city's winding streets had become an impossible maze of flickering signs and towering structures that seemed to shift in the strange light. She'd been on Pterodex for only 3 weeks, hired as a cartographer to map the unmapped districts for the Colonial Expansion Committee. It was supposed to be simple: document, analyze, compile. Nyx had done it 100 times on 100 worlds. But this world was different. This world had gotten under her skin in ways she didn't understand. And now the rain had washed away her sense of direction entirely. She checked the holographic map on her wrist, but the moisture was making it flicker and die, the coordinates dissolving into pixelated chaos. Nyx ducked under a narrow overhang, her dark hair plastered to her face, her breath coming in short, frustrated clouds. The buildings here were older, constructed from materials she didn't recognize, something between metal and coral, with surfaces that seemed to absorb and emit light at the same time. This wasn't the district she'd been mapping. She'd somehow wandered into the underbelly, forgotten parts of Pterodex that most travelers avoided. A sound stopped her thoughts. Music. It was unlike anything Nyx had ever heard. Not the synthetic beats that pumped from the bars and clubs in the main district, but something organic, something that seemed to resonate with the very rain itself. The notes climbed and fell like living things, melodic and strange and infinitely beautiful. Nyx found herself moving toward the sound without deciding to, her feet carrying her forward through the rain-slicked streets. The music led her to a building that looked abandoned. Its walls were covered in bioluminescent vines, or at least Nyx assumed they were vines. They pulsed with gentle blue and green light, responding to the rain, creating patterns like veins of living energy. A narrow staircase spiraled up the outside of the structure. The music was coming from above. Nyx climbed, without thinking. Her hands were wet, slipping on the metal rails, but the music pulled her upward, like gravity reversed. She emerged onto a rooftop garden, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. The space was impossible. In the middle of a harsh industrial port city, someone had cultivated what looked like a piece of paradise. Plants of every variety imaginable grew in carefully arranged tiers, some human varieties, some alien, some things that Nyx couldn't classify as plant or animal. The bioluminescent vines formed natural trellises, and the rain had turned the entire garden into something that glowed from within. Water collected in curved pools lined with smooth stones, and the droplets falling from above were creating concentric circles of light and shadow. And in the center of it all sat Sova. Nyx knew she was alien by the faint shimmer that seemed to exist just beyond her skin, a distortion in the air around her. Like heat waves, but more intentional, more controlled. Her features were delicate and asymmetrical in ways that suggested an entirely different evolutionary path. Her skin was a deep purple gray that seemed to shift slightly in the light. And her eyes were enormous and dark, with a ring of iridescent green around the pupil that caught the bioluminescent light. Sova was holding an instrument that Nyx had no name for. It looked like a cross between a stringed instrument and something organic. Like the body of it might be grown rather than constructed. She was coaxing sounds from it that transcended language. That seemed to speak directly to something primitive in Nyx's chest. When Sova saw Nyx standing at the edge of the garden, dripping wet and wild-eyed, she didn't stop playing. Instead, she smiled a slow, wondering smile that changed the entire shape of her face. Her fingers continued their dance across the strings. She tilted her head slightly, inviting Nyx forward without words. Nyx stepped into the garden, and it felt like stepping into a dream. The rain was warmer here, or maybe she was just warming from the inside out. She moved closer, drawn by the music and something else, something she couldn't name. Sova's music shifted, became more complex, layering melodies over melodies until it seemed like a dozen conversations were happening at once. "You're lost," Sova said finally. still playing, the words woven between the notes. Her voice was soft and had an unusual quality to it, harmonic, like she was singing and speaking simultaneously. Completely, Nix admitted. She should have been embarrassed, should have excused herself and found her way back to the main district. Instead, she stood rooted to the spot, watching the way Sova's fingers moved with impossible grace and precision. "This is good," Sova said. Her eyes never left Nix's face. "Being lost is how people find things they didn't know they were searching for." Nix laughed despite herself, a surprised, breathless sound. "That's a convenient philosophy for someone who apparently kidnaps lost travelers." "Did I kidnap you?" Sova's smile widened slightly. "I was just playing." "You followed the music." "That's not kidnapping. That's just good composing." The rain continued its violet descent around them, the garden responding to each drop with cascades of soft light. Nix realized she had stopped shivering. She sat down on a nearby stone bench, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how much the last 3 weeks of isolation and unfamiliar work had worn on her. Sova continued playing for several more minutes, and Nix found herself slipping into a kind of trance. The music seemed to map emotions she couldn't articulate, longing and wonder and the particular loneliness that came from being too far from home. When Sova finally stopped, setting the instrument carefully beside her, the silence that followed felt both empty and full. "I'm Sova," the alien woman said, moving from her chair to sit beside Nix, close enough that Nix could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her. She was a creature made of gentler temperature than humans. Nix replied, "And you're definitely some kind of magician." "No magic," Sova said softly. "Just listening. The rain was singing, the garden was singing, and I was translating." She paused, and Nix felt the weight of her attention like a physical thing. "And you came because you were listening to." Nix didn't argue. They sat together as the rain fell around them, the garden breathing in the darkness, and for the first time since arriving on Teradex, Nix felt like she'd found something worth being lost for. Nix hadn't meant to spend the entire night on Sova's rooftop. But when the rain had finally stopped and the bioluminescent garden had dimmed with the approaching dawn, neither of them had suggested leaving. Instead, they'd talked about Teradex, about the worlds they came from, about music and mapping and the strange geometry of loneliness. Sova had made tea from plants Nix couldn't identify, something that tasted like starlight and cinnamon. They'd shared a blanket as the temperature dropped. And Nix had rested her head on Sova's shoulder without asking permission. It was the most peaceful night Nix had experienced in years. The illusion shattered. The moment she returned to her temporary apartment in the Colonial District. "Nix, where the hell have you been?" Torvin stood in the center of her living room, his familiar, angular face twisted with equal parts anger and relief. His dark skin was flushed, and his expedition suit still bore the dust of recent travel. "I've been trying to reach you for 6 hours. Your wristcom has been offline." "My wristcom was damaged in the rain," Nix said carefully, setting down her bag. "I didn't know you were coming to Teradex, obviously." He moved toward her, and she had to resist the urge to step back. Torvin had been her partner on 3 previous expeditions, professional partner. Though there had been moments when it had seemed like it might become something more, nothing had ever developed, but the connection remained. The easy familiarity of people who had survived difficult things together. "The expansion committee sent me. They want faster results on the mapping project, and they thought having someone who knows your work style could help speed things up." Nix felt something tighten in her chest. She'd been beginning to like the slow pace of Teradex, the way it demanded attention and presence. Torvin represented efficiency, productivity, the very things she'd been learning to question. "No, I'm making good progress," she said. "There's no need to. There's every need." Torvin's expression softened slightly. "You look different. More tired, maybe, but also, I don't know, lighter, somehow." His eyes studied her with the intensity of someone trained in observation. "Something's happened here." Nix busied herself with making coffee, avoiding his gaze. "It's just an interesting planet. The culture is different, the technology hybrid. It's taking time to understand." Torvin didn't sound convinced. Well, we need to establish a proper base camp in the outer districts. I want to start systematic grid mapping by tomorrow. We can work through the night if necessary. No, Nix said firmly. The word surprised them both. Tomorrow is. I have a commitment. A commitment? Nix, you're here to work. The committee is paying you too. The committee is paying me to map the city, not to work myself to death doing it. Nix turned to face him, and she realized she meant it. We can start the grid mapping the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm unavailable. Torvin stared at her for a long moment, and she watched understanding bloom across his features. Oh, I see. There's someone. It's not like that. Nix started, then stopped. Was it not like that? She wasn't even sure what it was like. It's complicated, it always is. Torvin sat down heavily on her couch. Nix, I care about you. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I'm telling you, romantic entanglement on assignment is never a good idea. It clouds judgment, creates liability. I'm aware of the risks, Nix interrupted. But I'm also aware that I'm capable of making my own decisions. We'll start mapping in 2 days. For now, rest. You must be exhausted from travel. The underground music venue was nothing like Nix had expected. She'd assumed Sova meant something small and intimate. But when she arrived at the coordinates Sova had given her, she found herself descending into a vast cavern beneath the city's industrial heart. The space was carved from stone and metal, and it was packed with creatures of every description: humans, aliens, and things that existed somewhere in between. Sova had dressed for the performance in something that was more art than clothing, a garment that seemed to be made of the same bioluminescent material as her garden vines. It clung to her curves and trailed behind her like liquid light. When she took the stage, a platform that hung suspended over the crowd by cables she couldn't identify. The entire venue seemed to hold its breath, and then she began to play. It was different from the rooftop garden. That music had been personal, intimate, designed for an audience of one. This music was designed for a crowd, but it was no less transcendent. Sova's instrument sang with colors that shouldn't exist, notes that made Nix's skin prickle and her heart race. Around her, the crowd responded, some dancing, some weeping openly, some standing perfectly still, as if afraid to disturb the magic. Nix stood near the back, unable to look away. She'd been with Sova only once more since that first night they'd spent an afternoon in the garden, and Sova had played while Nix sketched, trying to capture the way light moved through the plants. It hadn't been much, but it had been enough to change Nix's internal geography entirely. Watching Sova perform, she understood something she'd been avoiding admitting. This wasn't casual attraction or simple curiosity about an alien culture. This was the kind of feeling that restructured priorities, that made everything else seem secondary. She was falling not slowly, not carefully, but like gravity had suddenly reversed, and she was plummeting upward into something terrifying and wonderful. When the performance ended, Sova found her in the crowd, took her hand without asking, and led her away from the venue. They walked through Teradex's lower levels, past markets and residential areas, until they reached a quiet district Nix had never seen. A small restaurant with windows that looked out over a channel of dark water. Sova ordered for both of them, in a language Nix didn't speak, and the proprietor, another alien, with skin like burnished copper, smiled knowingly. You played beautifully tonight, Nix said as they waited for food. I was thinking of you, Sova replied simply. Does that frighten you? The directness of the question caught Nix off guard. Yes, she admitted. It does. I'm supposed to be professional, distant. I have a partner who just arrived, and there are complications. And you're alien, and we barely know each other. And Sova reached across the table and placed her fingers over Nix's lips. I am not asking for complicated, she said softly. I am asking for honest. Are you here because you want to be, or because you're running from something? Nix pulled back enough to speak. Both, maybe. I came to Teradex because I was tired of always being the efficient one, the reliable one, and I was definitely running. But being here, being with you, that's the first time in years I've felt like I was running towards something instead of away. Then that is enough, Sova said. For now, that is enough. They talked through the meal, and after, they wandered back towards Sova's building. But before they could reach it, a figure stepped from the shadows. Torvin, his expression dark and disapproving.
Nix.
He said coldly. We need to talk. And you, he gestured at Sova, need to stay away from her. She's not here for whatever this is. Nix felt Sova's hand slip from hers, felt her start to withdraw, and something inside Nix cracked open. She stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and Torvin. And for the first time in their partnership, she didn't explain or negotiate. No, she said simply. I'm done doing what's expected. If you can't accept that, you can report to the committee that my services are no longer available. Torvin's face went pale. You're throwing away your career for an alien you just met? I'm choosing myself, Nix corrected. For once in my life, I'm choosing what I actually want instead of what I'm supposed to want. Behind her, Sova made a soft sound, not quite laughter, but something close. And when Nix turned back, there were tears in those enormous green eyes, and Sova was smiling like Nix had just played the most beautiful song in the universe. Come, Sova whispered, extending her hand. Let me show you the rooftop at night. The rain is coming again, and I want you to see what happens when the stars decide to fall. Nix took her hand and didn't look back.